Hi, I'm Taylor Toby. I'm an OpenSciEd teacher and facilitator, and today I'm going to walk you through Lesson 1 of the 8.4 unit Earth and Space. What's really important about this unit, it's the anchoring phenomenon. So we really want to generate a sense of curiosity with our students with this lesson, and there are many opportunities throughout this lesson to get them thinking and wondering and deciding how we could figure out how we can predict patterns we see in the sky. So let's break down this lesson. It is the anchoring phenomenon. It will take 4 days. The prep time takes about 40 minutes. Most of that is printing and organizing papers and preparing posters and your driving question board and things like that. There aren't any hands on investigations. Students will be looking at videos of henge events and listening to podcasts to help them start to wonder what's happening with the patterns we see in the sky. Devices will be required so that you can play the video and the podcasts. When we look at the flow of this lesson, in the first day, students figure out that henge events, like Manhattan Henge, are predictable and people are really drawn to them. And it makes us wonder, are there other patterns in the sky that are like this? In the second day, after listening to podcasts and sharing out their own personal star stories, students realize that there are these patterns in the skies that people have noticed across time, across cultures, across locations in the world, and they are deeply connected to people's daily lives and kind of the rhythm of a whole year. And it really makes us wonder, why are these patterns happening everywhere and how has everyone noticed them? What's going on? That leads us into the third day where we try to model what we think is happening for these different phenomenon. We compare our models and develop a class consensus model. And we realize that, hey, there's a lot of stuff that we agree on, but we have tons of questions, which navigates us to the final day of the lesson where students build the driving question board and brainstorm next steps for future investigations where we could collect the information that we need and figure out the answers to all of our questions. In this lesson, we will figure out that changing patterns in the sky connect to our lives on Earth, that stories related to the sky are a way to preserve knowledge and make decisions. And in order to explain complex systems, sometimes we'll have to view it from multiple perspectives. During this lesson, you'll also want to bring to the forefront that light moves in a straight line and that the Earth spins on its axis, spins around once each day, day and night, and goes around the sun once a year. Now we're going to look at some key moments in lesson 1. In part 3, students will share out objects and interactions that they believe cause us to see or not see Manhattan Henge, or another henge event if you decide to use that. You're not making a diagram together, you're just generating a list of parts and interactions, such as light from the sun, buildings, things like that. And you really want to support cause and effect. If your students have used the forces at a distance unit previously, you can lean back on that where they were building cause and effect relationships. If, like me, you hadn't taught that unit before teaching this, you can have them think about like a cause and effect statement. Like when this happens in space, people would on Earth would see, and that kind of helps them think about changes in interactions that might have different effects of what we can see on Earth. And this is where we can begin to talk about scale and perspective. That what we are seeing for this henge event is really because our view on Earth is limited. If we think of a different perspective, like from outer space, we can see how objects are moving in different ways that might cause our limited view on Earth. Now, students don't need to have all of the answers just yet. This is just getting them to start thinking about multiple perspectives and how changes in those parts of the system will have different effects for our view on Earth. In part 8, where students are making sense of the podcasts and sharing out from their jigsaw, Really intentionally have them focus the conversations on the culture in the sky pattern. There's a lot of information in these podcasts, and sometimes my students would end up getting lost in some details that weren't important to that sky pattern. And so, kind of refocusing those conversations and making sure that they know the purpose of listening to the podcast is to notice that sky pattern and why that sky pattern was important to the culture they were listening and reading about will really help them narrow in on what you want them to notice for each podcast. And then having an explicit conversation, definitely in whole group, so you know that each group got it. How did that pattern affect the lives of the people on Earth? Most of the time, it has to do with crops and agriculture, and those sky patterns are noting changes in season. What I really liked about this anchoring phenomenon is that when it comes to the initial model, it's a little bit different than students have experienced in all of the other units, that they get to pick out what they want to model, that they can pick any pattern from the podcasts or their own star stories. I highly recommend maybe projecting a list so students can have a little bit of guidance. They can feel overwhelmed with the amount of choice where you say, hey, you can pick any pattern to model. You may need to remind them that you need to focus on a sky pattern, meaning that it is repeated and predictable. We don't want to go into weather. That's not what this unit is about. We are focusing on space. So having that list to kind of guide them and think about what pattern is repeated and predictable will be helpful. This is also a good time to have a conversation about change in perspective and what that means. If one perspective is the view from Earth, where else could we be? Like maybe we're an astronaut viewing from, and then they get to pick where else they would view. We want to gear them towards picking from a solar system view where you could see Earth and the sun and the moon and how those objects are moving. Where do we go from here? We end lesson 1 thinking like, we really like to explain some other sky patterns than Manhattan Henge. What else is a predictable event that we might be able to explain? And that'll get us to lesson 2. Now here's some material management tips and tricks. With the podcast jigsaw, when you're making your groups, something to keep in mind is the complexity of each podcast. All of them are accessible to a wide range, but if you want to break it down by complexity, it is listed on the slide. I highlighted wombat season because depending on how you want to split up your groups, this will come back as a transfer task assessment later on at the end of lesson set 1. So if you think that students maybe who might struggle a little need to hear about wombat season now and again a few lessons later, keep that in mind and you can put them in that group. It's also possible for you to have students pick their groups based on interest in the titles, but definitely print out transcripts for annotating. You could maybe have if color copy is an issue, having it as a transcript in black and white, and then having some photos from the Google Doc separate printed in color as, say, a class or group set. Word wall management. In this lesson, we will earn 2 words: pattern, meaning something that happens over and over again, and change in perspective, so having a different point of view. Poster management. A lot is happening in this lesson. You will create a poster for Manhattan Henge where students are sharing out their notices and wonderings from the video they watch, as well as making a list of the parts and interactions in the system before students start modeling what they think is happening with Manhattan Henge. You can hang on to that. We will be coming back in lesson 5 to Manhattan Henge once we figure out what's going on. And you'll also have a poster for the podcast wonderings, and then materials that you create that you're going to keep using for future lessons, your driving question board, the ideas for future investigations or data that we need, the phenomenon and patterns in the sky, that will be used a lot, especially in lesson set 1, and then your initial consensus model. It's a lot of posters being created in this lesson, but because it's lesson one, this is really kind of setting our pathway and having students create kind of what we want to figure out and where we want to go. So these are really useful posters to help guide thinking for the whole unit. Thank you so much for joining me with lesson one. I hope you and your students have a lot of fun digging into Manhattan Henge and these podcasts and really wondering what is happening to cause these patterns in the sky. I'll see you in lesson two.